A single clue, buried for half a century, finally uncovered. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Drop a comment below and share where you're listening from. Your insight keeps the story alive. It was in the autumn of '95, when the leaves in the park had turned the colour of tarnished sovereigns and a sullen vapour rolled up from the river, that a singular matter was brought to my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Singular not merely for the perfidy it revealed, but for the persistence with which a small, disregarded scrap of the past refused to lie quietly in its grave. I have observed before that time itself is a conspirator in crime, and in this instance it had conspired for half a century. I had returned to Baker Street after an absence of several weeks upon professional calls, and found Holmes in a condition of lazy serenity, his long frame pitched at an angle upon the settee, the bow of his violin dangling from his fingers, and a thin wreath of smoke from his pipe uncoiling itself as though to explore the ceiling's cracks for some clue worthy of it. The morning papers lay strewn upon the rug like the discarded scales of a serpent. From these I gathered that London, in its usual manner, had contrived to entertain itself most industriously during my short exile. A fire in Bermondsey, a banking scandal in Threadneedle Street, and the cryptic headline, "Mayfair Robbery, Jewels Spared, Papers Gone," which had already been labelled by one penny-a-liner as the work of a gentleman thief. Holmes flicked the ash from his pipe with that air of half amusement and half contempt which the feebler workings of the press so often excited in him. "The fellow's vocabulary outruns his discernment, Watson," said he, without lifting his gaze from the smoke. "When a thief is indifferent to rubies and covets paper, it is not gentility that moves him, but fear." He would say no more, for even as I opened my mouth to press him, there came a brisk, metallic knock upon the door, followed by Mrs. Hudson's discreet ushering in of a gentleman whose face bore the pallor of the writing desk and whose dress announced both prosperity and method. He was tall and spare, with iron-grey whiskers and a nose like the edge of a ledger. Under his arm he carried a japanned deed-box, and in his gloved hand a parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied about with string. The string, I noticed, was frayed at one corner and faintly discoloured, as if it had been handled by fingers less scrupulous than the wearer's. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said he, with a quick bow, "my name is Percival Hargreaves, of the firm Hargreaves, Pottle and Burns, solicitors, of Lincoln's Inn. I beg the favour of a quarter-hour." "You have it," said Holmes. "Pray, be seated. You have come from Curzon Street by way of Vigo, after a vexatious interview with a man who wears a cornflower in his buttonhole and the moral habits of a rook. But continue. The time will—" "Keep!" Our visitor started, darted a glance at his sleeve, and managed a pale smile that did credit to his good breeding. "You are notorious, Mr. Holmes. I might almost say, comfortingly so. I shall come straight to the point. A robbery was committed at number 14 Curzon Street last night, at the townhouse of my client, Lady Eleanora St. Aubyn, widow of the late Admiral Sir Leonard St. Aubyn. The thief, or thieves, ignored silver, plate and jewels of considerable value. They forced a single lock within a private writing room and carried off one article only, an old faded playbill dated the 21st of October, 1845. Holmes did not stir, but I saw a faint tightening at the corner of his mouth. "A playbill?" I echoed, incredulous in spite of myself. "Just so, Dr. Watson. A tattered thing folded into a memorandum envelope, kept among the late Admiral's personal papers. The housekeeper believes it had not been disturbed for years. We had the house in order for the Michaelmas guests. Everything was as usual at 11 o'clock. By morning the lock was sprung, the envelope gone, and a small quantity of dust upon the carpet disturbed in a manner I have taken the liberty to preserve." He tapped the parcel on his knee. "There is more. The butler, a man of 15 years' service, Mr. Cade, was found this morning lying insensible in the scullery with a bruise behind the ear. He has not recovered his senses. Nothing else appears to have been taken." "You spoke of Curzon Street," said Holmes. Yet you came to us with a deed box from Lincoln's Inn. Your haste was great, and your anxiety greater. What else is in that box, Mr. Hargreaves?" The solicitor hesitated, then removed the lid with a solicitor's care and lifted out a single object wrapped in tissue. A ring, plain gold, with an oval bezel bearing a simple crest of a ship's wheel surmounting an anchor. The inner surface was darkened as if by ancient wax. "This," said he, "was found by Lady Eleanora 2 days ago within a family Bible at their country place in Kent. It is the Admiral's signet. The family believed it lost since 1845, in point of fact. The ring was wrapped in the same envelope as the playbill, tied with this string. The Admiral set great store by it. He would not have willingly parted with the one nor the other." "2 days ago," murmured Holmes, "and last night the playbill alone is stolen, while the newly found ring travels to town under the protection of your deed box. Why did you separate them?" "Because of this." Hargreaves drew from his pocket a small sheet of notepaper and handed it to Holmes. Upon it was traced in a firm, somewhat old-fashioned hand, "If the ring be found, the truth is within 50 years hiding. Keep the ring. The paper is perilous." It was signed only with an initial, an S cleverly wrought into a flourish that might have been a mariner's rope. "Lady Eleanora found that—" "Note pinned inside the envelope," said Hargreaves. "It set her in a panic. She sent for me at once. We agreed to remove the ring to my office. The envelope with the playbill we left at Curzon Street for safekeeping while I arranged a bank deposit. You see the result." Holmes sat up, the indolence gone from his figure. He held the ring against the light, turned it, sniffed it, and then passed it to me. A faint, resinous odour clung to the inner groove, such as I have noticed in the seals of very old documents. "Tell me, Hargreaves," said Holmes, leaning forward, "do you know of any family incident of weight in the year 1845? A quarrel? A will? A marriage forbidden or concealed?" The solicitor compressed his lips. "There is a tale. Families have them, Mr. Holmes. That Sir Leonard, before he went up to the Baltic, was betrothed to a certain Miss Vale, a governess of no fortune. The match was opposed by the late Lord St. Aubyn, his father. The lady vanished from the record that year, and the Admiral married a baronet's daughter 3 seasons later. That is all. Gossip, and nothing to do with a ring, a playbill, and a warning that speaks of 50 years. Holmes's eyes had that quick glitter I have come to associate with danger rather than delight. "Pray continue." Hargreaves swallowed. "I have another item, though it may be nonsense. When I examined the family Bible, I found between the pages of Jeremiah a scrap of newsprint, the corner of a column. The date had been torn away, but the typeface looks to be mid-century. It mentions in passing a performance at the Strand Theatre, The Lady of Lions, for the evening of October 21st. The very date on the stolen bill. Perhaps a coincidence, perhaps not." Holmes rose and paced to the window, where the fog pressed its cold cheek against the pane like a warder listening at a cell door. "You will not find the thief among gentlemen," said he softly. "A man who takes a paper and leaves a diamond does not rob, he retrieves. He retrieves with purpose. What was left in the writing room besides the empty place in the envelope? Nothing disturbed but a brass paperweight and a railway timetable for Kent, out of date, I believe." Holmes turned at that with the faintest nod. "You have done wisely to come. Mr. Hargreaves, you must take steps to deny, in print if necessary, that anything of value was taken from Curzon Street. Let the fellow suppose he has been too late or too clever. Either will serve. Meanwhile, we shall call at Lady Eleanora's before luncheon. Watson, your hat." "Our man Cade?" I asked as I reached for my coat. "If he lives, he will remember nothing," said Holmes. "The bruise behind the ear is the calling card of one who dislikes conversation. But the kitchen has other tongues, and floors are loquacious. I should like to hear what the dust has to say." Hargreaves, who had risen in some relief, paused, as if struck by a recollection. From the pocket of his coat, he produced a small, round object wrapped in tissue. the sort a child might treasure. I had quite forgot. This was at the bottom of the envelope from the Bible, under the playbill and the note. It fell out when I examined them. I replaced it, thinking it of no matters. Now, he placed upon our table a theatre token, brass and worn smooth, with the number G17 punched through its centre. Holmes bent over it, and I saw the muscles along his jaw harden. "G for gallery," said he, "and 17 for a seat a poor governess might afford. Mr. Hargreaves, we are dealing with a hand that has reached from 1845 to 1895, and with a heart that never left its seat." "And with what crime, Mr. Holmes?" asked the solicitor in a low voice. Holmes straightened, and for an instant all the shadows of Baker Street seemed to gather under his eyes. "That," said he, "we shall discover when we see exactly what a man feared so much that he could not allow a dead woman's paper to breathe London air for a second night." With that, he swept the playbills and newspapers from the rug with the edge of his shoe, took up his stick, and motioned us to the door. The fog beyond had thickened, and the bells from some distant chapel tolled the hour. It seemed to me that they tolled not merely for a morning in London, but for the closing of a half-century's silence, and for whatever might rise after so long a time to break it. Mrs. Hudson had our cab to the curb before we reached the stair. The fog lay in strata along the streets, so that a hansom seemed to plunge and surface like a swimmer crossing a chill lake. Hargreaves sat taut between us, his gloved hands clasped upon the deed box as though it were a life buoy. Holmes, in those brief intervals when the lamps made islands in the murk, studied with a sidelong eye the frayed string about the parcel of dust and the brass token marked G17, which he had slipped into his waistcoat. "You preserved the dust with what? Paper and a coal shovel?" he inquired, not unkindly. "A square of Bristol board from Lady Eleanor's stationery," said Hargreaves. "I slid it under the disturbed patch and coaxed the upper film aboard with a paper knife." "Commendable delicacy for a solicitor," murmured Holmes. "One does not often find method and courage in the same bag." Curzon Street, when we gained it, was quiet and very clean, the houses looking upon one another with that high-bred indifference which is the peculiar talent of Mayfair. A tall grey lady received us in the hall. Grief had sharpened her voice, but not her composure. This was Lady Eleanor St. Aubyn. She pressed Holmes's hand with simple dignity and led us at once to the writing-room, pausing only to speak to a maid concerning broth for the butler, who, we learned, still lay pale and senseless in a back chamber. "You will forgive me, Lady Eleanor," said Holmes, "if I ask for the kitchen before the study." She inclined her head, and so we went by way of the service passage, where a draught brought the fog's bitter tang even to those sacred precincts of the English household. Mr. Cade lay upon a settle, his hair neatly parted as if by habit even in swoon. Holmes examined the bruise behind the ear with a surgeon's tenderness. "A sap," he observed to me, "weighted, not a fist. The direction is from right rear to left front. Our man is left-handed, or prefers his left for work of precision. No tearing of the skin, so the leather was smooth, likely a sailor's cosh bound with cord." "Smell?" I bent. There was an acrid, stale odour. Tobacco, but not the cigar my friend catalogued so expertly. "Shag," said Holmes before I could speak. "Navy cut, very strong with a trace of tar. You perceive it? The tar clings when the pouch has been long against a oiled coat." The kitchen itself gave other tongue. Holmes noted the smear of black upon the scullery door, lamp soot brushed by a sleeve, the wet print of a boot upon the flag just within the areaway, and with his lens, a grain or two of gritty matter upon the sill. He touched it to his tongue, frowned, and dabbed another to the corner of a handkerchief. "River sand with clinker," he said. "Not the soft soil of Hyde Park, not the cleaner grit of Regent Street. A man who lives near the lower Thames or comes by it. Very good. Tell me, Lady Eleanor, what hour do your servants retire?" "Mrs. Reeve, the housekeeper, locks the rear at 11.
she replied steadily. Mr. Cade makes a last round at past. He was found at 6. Holmes nodded and asked to see the writing room. It was a pleasant chamber overlooking the street, furnished in mahogany and dark green. The desk stood to the right of the window. In a small alcove, a cabinet with glass doors held naval charts in cylinders and a few volumes of voyages. A stout brass paperweight, shaped like a globe upon a stand, sat on the desk's corner. A railway timetable of the South Eastern Company lay beside it, the edges furred with age. Holmes did not begin with the obvious. He went first to the sash, peered at the latch, and touched the paint at the meeting rail with a pin from his cuff. "No forcing," he murmured, "and the dust upon the outer sill is even. Our man did not enter here." He crossed to the door, squatted with that peculiar folded ease of his, and studied the carpet. "So, Mr. Hargreaves, your Bristol board." The solicitor produced the parcel as though presenting an exhibit in court. Holmes opened it with careful hands. What to me was a faint, irregular scuff, like the ghost of a footfall, to him was a sentence. He arranged the sifted film upon the carpet to match the gap it had been lifted from, and then, taking a little lens from his pocket, traced with the butt of a pencil a narrow track, not of shoe but of knee, leading from the
desk to the hearthrug and back. "He knelt," said Holmes, "here, so that his left side faced the desk and his right could reach the lower drawer. You observe the smoothness? A man who kneels much wears his cloth in a certain way. This abrasion is diagonal, not square. Sailor's serge, woven coarse, leaves a diagonal tooth." He sniffed the air above the carpet, then over the brass paperweight. On its polished summit, a faint smear showed, a film that yielded to the least pressure. "Rouge," he said, and there was a glint in his eye. "Stage rouge. The cheap sort has a smell of rancid fat. I have met it in dressing rooms. Our man had it upon his fingers, or else upon his sleeve, and set the globe askew. He replaced it, but not precisely. Thus." He nudged the weight to a barely different angle and showed us, with a match, the line of lighter pile where it had been accustomed to sit. I confess to an inward thrill. There is nothing in this world so bracing to the imagination as the sight of a mind easing truth out of trifles. "The timetable?" I ventured. Holmes turned to it last, as a man might turn to his cigar after a satisfactory dinner. He lifted it by 2 corners, blew, and commented when a faint puff of dust left one edge more than the other. "Moved within 48 hours, he said, "yet it is 3 years out of date. A thief does not consult an obsolete timetable in the midst of his work. Someone else took it up, perhaps to point our visitor toward Kent, perhaps to frighten Lady Eleanora, who last handled this book." She looked genuinely at a loss. "I cannot recall. It has lain there since my husband's last London season. I do remember that Mr. Hargreaves sat at this very desk 2 days ago when he examined the Bible. He may have shifted it." Hargreaves, thus appealed to, coloured slightly. "It is possible. I laid out papers." Holmes accepted the confession with a tilt of the hand, neither accusatory nor absolving. He then drew out the lower drawer. Within was a neat emptiness, marred only by a faint rectangle of cleaner wood where an envelope had lain. "Note the dimension," he said. "Longer than the ordinary, a legal envelope of the old fashion, exactly as you described. And here, Watson." He directed my eye to a minute crescent caught in a crack of the drawer's lip. I teased it out on the point of a penknife. It was a hair, fine, pale, of that colour which, in certain lights, is almost invisible, and, what is rarer, cut square as if by sharp scissors close to the head. "Women's hair," said Holmes, "but not a lady's, a working woman's, and singed a trifle at the end, as from a gas jet too close in a cheap lodging. It was caught when the envelope was hurriedly snatched. Our man's sleeve brought it, or else it clung to the envelope beforehand." Lady Eleanora had watched all this with admirable calm, yet I saw her knuckles whiten upon the chair back when Holmes, without preface asked, "Who besides your household knew of the playbills being found?" "No one, save Mr. Hargreaves," she replied. "And the maid who dusts this room, I spoke of it incautiously to Mrs. Reeve, perhaps to Mr. Cade, when he brought the tea-tray." "The maid?" "Annie Pike, sir," the housekeeper answered from the doorway. She had entered unobserved, as housekeepers will. A steady girl, her father's a labourer at the Adelphi Wharf. Holmes's eyes rested for a second upon the woman's face and then drifted past her to the mantel. There, propped against a china clock, lay a small card, one of those tradesmen's notices which multiply in London like midges. He took it up. "J. Pike and Son, dealers in prints and playbills, Monmouth Court, 7 Dials." "Your Annie's relation?" he asked mildly. "Her uncle," said Mrs. Reeve after the shortest of pauses. Holmes laid the card down again with the care of one replacing a pawn. "Pray see that Annie continues her duties as usual, and that she is not frightened out of the house," he said. "Fear curdles truth." He stood a moment in thought, the lines of his face sharpened by the grey light. Then he took from his pocket the theatre token and balanced it on his nail so that it spun, glinting. It fell with the G uppermost. "Watson," said he, "if a heart may keep its seat for 50 years, a theatre can keep a habit. The Strand keeps an old bill or two and an older doorkeeper who remembers faces. We shall present G17 to him and see whether a ghost will answer." "And the house?" asked Hargreaves uneasily. "If the thief returns—" "He will not," Holmes replied. "He has recovered what he feared, but fear is a chain that leads in 2 directions. He has left us enough of its links, a left-handed seaman who tastes of tar and rouge, a girl with singed fair hair, a family whose past touches an October stage. We will go to the Strand, and after that to 7 Dials. Meanwhile, Mr. Hargreaves, you will oblige me by telegraphing your clerk to look up any case in which J. Pike and Son have been concerned with the sale of naval memorabilia in the last 5 years, names of purchasers, if possible." Lady Eleanor's composure faltered for the first time. "Mr. Holmes," she said in a low voice, "if it should touch my husband's honour—" "It will concern," he answered, "something older than honour and more obstinate. Truth is a tide. One may hold it off with sand for a season, but not beyond the moon's patience. Come, Watson, there is a certain draught upon the Strand that blows memory into men's eyes." The Strand had put on its daytime smile, a brisk, chaffering cheerfulness which no London fog can quite extinguish. Cabs rattled, clerks in black hurried with the air of men whose minutes have all been pawned. And in the midst, the theatre front presented its painted boards and glass cases as jauntily as if 100 nights could not stale its promise. Holmes, who at need can pass through a crowd as a knife through water, brought us to the stage door with a nod to the porter within, a gnarled little man whose face had the seamed, good-humoured shrewdness of an old boot. "Morning, Wilkes," said Holmes, as if he had stepped out only 5 minutes before. The porter lifted his cap. "If it isn't Mr. Holmes, we've a new farce tonight, sir. You'll say it's stolen from the French, and you'll be right." "Another theft, Wilkes. Let us speak of an older one. Does your memory keep a brass check?" Holmes flicked the token so that it rang upon the wooden shelf. G17. The Strand used these in the 40s. Wilkes's eyes narrowed. He took the disc between finger and thumb and rubbed it upon his sleeve, as if the number might come up clearer for warmth from an old hand. "Lord love me," he breathed. "Gallery token. We changed to pasteboard in 50 or thereabouts. Where'd you pick that up?" "In a Bible," said Holmes gravely, "and behind the Bible a woman, and behind the woman a sailor. Think of October the 21st, 45, the Lady of Lions. There was some trouble, was there not?" Wilkes's face altered by slow degrees as a tide runs up the scar of a beach.
There was a bit of rough, he allowed. 2 young gents from the river service, middies if I know the breed, come skylarking up our top hall. There was dock lads in the gods that night, and a sailor man with one sleeve stitched queer, like he'd mended it hisself, and tar in his whiskers. He had along of him a gel as kept her veil down. Weren't his wife, no ring I seed, but he kept her as if the wind was cutting her. When the gents began their jaw, the sailor asked 'em civil to hold their noise for the lady's sake. They laughed. He shifted the pair of them with a left like a capstan bar. That started the song. Manager called the peelers. We had a tumble down the outer stair, a hat lost, a handful of hair, and a chair leg broke short as a moral. "Your sailor bled?" Holmes asked. "A touch from a brass nail," said Wilkes. He reached to the back of the shelf and brought out a small wooden box with a pride which had the pathos of a veteran showing his medal. "We keeps our curious. There's the leg of the chair, and here—" He delved and produced a folded, much-thumbed paper, pink once, and now the tired brown of an old rose. "A bill of that very night. A lady left it stuck under the seat. Gallery, back row, and I picked it after. We've a drawer of such rubbish for luck. This un has pencil on the back." Holmes's long fingers received it as a priest might take a relic. He turned it under the light, and I saw there in a delicate hand 2 small notations, G17, and beneath it the faintest sketch of a wheel upon an anchor. Between them, like the breath of a thought, the letters MV. "Mary Vale," I murmured, recalling Hargreaves's tale. Holmes's eyelids drooped. "Or Margaret or Martha. It is sufficient that it is a V. Wilkes, did a ring change hands that night?" "Ring? There was a ring come to me next morning," said the porter, scratching at the thatch above his ear. "Found under the stair in the sweepings. I mind it had a smear of some waxy stuff inside. Gave it up to a gentleman as called for it, older than the sailor, carried hisself like a man used to being obeyed, paid ½ a crown for trouble. He didn't give a name and I didn't ask. We was easy that way. Might have been a St. Summit. The quality used to drop in for the green room." Holmes folded the playbill with an odd tenderness and slipped it into his case. "You kept the drawer of rubbish," said he, "and your memory with it. The theatre owes you more than ½ a crown. If anyone asks to see your old cheques or bills today, Wilkes, praise Providence in your heart and send him to me at Baker Street." "Aye, Mr. Holmes," said the porter, with a gravity which told me he understood more than his dialect allowed him to say. "There's sea about this right enough. I can smell it. We go from a stage door to a court where the stage props go to die," Holmes remarked as we turned into the press of the Strand. "7 Dials, Watson, Monmouth Court, a family tradesman, a niece in service, a shop that will buy anything with print upon it, especially if the print comes fresh from a lady's distress." 7 Dials had not mended its manners since last I visited it. Its human tide eddied round us in rags and colours, with the indefinable odour of fried fish, damp straw, and old sins. J. Pike and Son displayed in its narrow window a huddle of engravings, hand-coloured caricatures of politicians with asparagus noses, playbills pinned at skewed angles, and a glass case in which a naval button and a silver boatswain's whistle lay upon black velvet, as solemn as relics. The man who rose from the high stool at our entry had hair the hue of tow and whiskers, whose points showed a tarry shine, as if oil had been his earlier occupation. His eyes were pale and shifty, and his left hand, the thumb stained with printer's blue, had the muscular forefinger of a man accustomed to twine and knot. On the shelf beside him lay a pipe, whose smell struck me even before Holmes's nostrils lifted, the harsh, salty reek of a powerful shag. "Mr. Pike," said Holmes pleasantly. "Jabez Pike," returned the man. "And son, when he's out of bed, you have the look of a gent as knows his Gilray. We've a crookshank as would make ye cry with joy. We weep for other causes. We desire, rather, to know who sells you playbills newly come from Curzon Street." Pike's pale eyes hardened
and then slid away with practiced indifference. We buy from porters, ragmen, actors out of place, and young
Ladies with a fancy for gloves, he said. We're the poor man's pawnbroker for paper. And the St. Albans paper? Holmes's tone was silk. A girl with fair hair singed at the ends, a touch of gas to it, and a steady step for morning work. She would bring a bill of the Lady of Lyons, the old cut with the rosy border. What did you give? Pike's left hand went to the pipe and then back again, an involuntary dance. If such a thing came in, I'd give coppers. Old is cheap unless it's rare. It is 50 years old, said Holmes. Rarity is a matter of who asks. A gentleman who smokes your tobacco and binds his cosh with sailor's cord has asked. He will be back when your niece, or your brother's child, has brought him the rest. The man's jaw trembled and set. You'll not talk that way of Annie Pike in my shop, he muttered. She's a good girl and keeps her place in a noble house, what feeds more mouths than yours or mine together. Holmes' gaze, though quiet, could strip paint. It is because she is a good girl that you will stand out of her light. Tell me, what name did the seaman give? Pike stared with a sullenness that was part fear. No name. He called himself Jack, as if that weren't every second man below bridge. Holmes drifted a step, as if idly inspecting a wall of handbills. His gloved finger paused by a notice newly pinned. Wanted. Old naval relics and papers. Highest prices. Apply discreetly. Sea brand. Rooms. Anchor Lane. Wapping. The sea was formed with the same sailorly loop which Hargreaves had shown us in the anonymous warning. Your bills are eloquent, Mr. Pike, Holmes observed. They speak with the very hand that wrote, "The paper is perilous." You will oblige me with the address of the person who posted this. The lad brought it, Pike evaded. I never see gentlemen. If I had, I'd charge extra. Holmes considered him an instant, then laid a half-sovereign upon the counter with a fingernail that clicked. Our friend will charge a great deal presently, said he. Earn yours cheaper. When did he last come? This morning, Pike yielded, gulping as the gold passed under his thumb. Before 10. Left me that to keep an eye out, he said. He's took a room by the Anchor, back of the lane, 3rd floor, to the right. Calls hisself Captain Brant or Brant. Foreign twist to it. He's no captain in any Queen's list, I'll swear. Left-handed, said Holmes. Pike blinked. He pays with his left, if that's what you mean. And he smokes like a ship's galley. Holmes drew on his glove. You will tell your niece nothing of our visit, he said. If the gentleman calls again, you will show him that notice. He touched the Anchor Lane card. And nothing more. If you value your window glass, you will not sell him a single scrap until I have seen him. We can take a harmless walk.
As far as Wapping, Watson. The day is improving. Out in the foul little court, Holmes stood quite still, his head thrown back, tasting the air as a hound throws up his muzzle to taste a scent upon a breeze. Our circle closes, he murmured. Strand, 7 Dials, river. The past keeps to its old roads. A signet found in a Bible, a bill in a theatre drawer, a notice nailed for fools to read. All these point down river. There is a man in Anchor Lane who fears a paper more than the rope. We will see what anchor it is that holds him. And Annie? I asked. She must not be frightened, said he shortly. When a conscience is tender, it is easily bruised. Keep your eyes open for any messenger from Curzon Street to Monmouth Court. If the girl is pressed, it will be today. The trap that waits at Anchor Lane will be sprung with a finger from 7 Dials. He hailed a cab with a whistle that cut the hubbub like a blade. As we mounted, I glanced back. Jabez Pike had the half-sovereign on the counter, turning it, dazzled. In his window, a lavender-tinted bill fluttered faintly where Holmes's finger had brushed it. And for the first time since the morning, I felt that queer lift of the spirit which means that my friend had scented not merely a quarry, but the trail that leads to the heart of the wood. The fog thickened again as our cab rattled eastward, and I could not help but feel that every jolt of the wheels brought us deeper into some dark design that had waited half a century for its hour. Holmes, as usual when his mind was fully engaged, lapsed into a silence so absolute that the noise of the streets became painfully distinct. The clatter of hooves, the creak of axles, the hoarse cries of vendors drifting in from alleys we did not see. He sat forward, fingers drumming lightly on the theatre token he still held, as if beating out the rhythm of a calculation that only he could hear. Wapping is a place where the Thames seems to breathe more heavily than elsewhere, and where every brick wall and broken window whispers of old voyages and forgotten crimes. By the time we turned into Anchor Lane, the air smelt not of the metropolis, but of the sea. Tar, rope, fish, and that indefinable dampness which clings to every timber within a stone's throw of the wharves. The house we sought was a ramshackle building, its plaster flaking, its signboard long illegible. Yet a faint light leaked from the third floor, precisely as Pike had indicated. Holmes dismissed the cab and stood a moment surveying the narrow court, his gaze lingering upon the puddles where the lamps made shifting, oily halos. "We must tread carefully, Watson," he murmured. "Our quarry is not of the timid breed. A man who dares to strip the house of an admiral's widow, and who strikes down a butler, as one might a mastiff, will not scruple at worse. Keep your revolver to hand." We entered by a side door, whose latch yielded to the slightest pressure, and mounted. The creaking stair. Each step echoed with ominous distinctness, and more than once I fancied I heard the floor above us pause, then resume its pacing, as though the tenant had marked our approach. At the landing, Holmes halted and laid his ear against the panel of the right-hand door. For a space he stood motionless, then with a swift gesture bade me stand back. He tapped twice with the flat of his hand. There was the scrape of a chair within, a muttered oath, and then the door opened a cautious inch. A man's face appeared in the gap, seamed, weather-worn, and framed by a beard streaked with iron grey. One eye was clouded, the other shone with a wary light. "What's your business?" he demanded harshly, and I noted that his words came thick with the burr of some foreign shore. Holmes stepped forward so that the light fell upon his features. "Our business is with Captain Brant," he said quietly. "We know of the playbill, the ring, and the paper that was taken from Curzon Street." The man's good eye narrowed to a slit, and for an instant I thought he would slam the door. But instead, he threw it wide with a sudden, reckless energy, as though defiance were safer than concealment. "Come in, then," he growled. "Come in, and be damned for your knowledge. I am Captain Brant, or so I call myself. If you want the truth, you'll have to wrest it out of me. I've kept it close these 50 years, and I'll not spill it easy now." The room bore out Holmes's earlier surmise. A sailor's chest stood open by the wall, its contents a confusion of charts, cordage, and odd scraps of uniform. A half-burnt candle guttered on a table where a clay pipe lay still warm. The air was thick with shag tobacco and the sour tang of cheap rouge, perhaps from some discarded costume or disguise. Upon the table itself lay a sheaf of playbills, some yellowed with age, others freshly printed, and beside them a small leather-bound journal clasped with brass. Holmes's glance swept the scene in a single movement, yet his voice remained mild. "You have a collection, Captain, papers and relics from days long past, but one in particular you value more than the rest. Why is that?" Brant dropped heavily into a chair, his great hands gripping the arms until the knuckles whitened. For a moment he looked like a man wrestling with himself, as if words pressed to his lips that he dared not utter. Then with a hoarse laugh he said, "Because it is death to me and shame to others. That is reason enough. But tell me this, Mr. Holmes, who set you on my track? Was it the lady or her tame lawyer?" "It was the truth that set me," Holmes answered calmly.
And truth will not be silenced by a cosh, nor hidden behind rouge and tar. You fear that playbill because it holds a memory of a woman with fair hair, a woman who sat in the gallery of the Strand in October of '45. At that, Brandt's mask slipped. He half rose, then fell back.
Again, and I could see the cords in his neck tighten as though he had been struck. His one keen eye darted to the journal upon the table, then to Holmes, then away again. "You know too much already," he muttered. "Aye, there was such a woman, Mary Vale she was called, and she loved a man she should not have loved. That is all you'll get from me." Holmes seated himself opposite, his long fingers steepled, his gaze fixed upon the sailor with a patience that was more terrible than threat. "It is not all," he said softly, "for the ring speaks, and the note pinned within the Bible speaks, and the very dust upon the carpet speaks. They tell me that you were not merely a witness, but an actor in the drama of that night. And the bill you stole is the last prop of a play that ended in silence and despair. Will you not unburden yourself, Captain? The years have already judged you." Brandt stared at him long, then flung up a hand as if to ward off the inevitable. "Not here, not now. There are ears even in these rotten walls. If you must have the tale, come to the riverside tomorrow at dusk. The old hulk Mercury lies off Execution Dock, waiting for the breaker's yard. I'll be there, and I'll speak. Till then, not a word more." Holmes rose at once, and though disappointment flickered across his features, he bowed as courteously as if he had been taking leave of a nobleman. "So be it. We shall keep our appointment. But mark this, Captain Brandt. If you play us false, there are those who already hold enough to bring the police to your door." The sailor gave a grim smile. "The police? Let them come. I've faced worse than their cells, but I'll keep my word. Go now, before I change my mind." We left him there, silhouetted against the candlelight, his figure stooped and weary, yet still formidable. As we descended the stairs, the boards groaning beneath our tread, I could not shake the impression that we had spoken with a man less afraid of the gallows than of some ghost that haunted his memory. Out in the lane again, the river's breath wrapped around us like a cold shroud. Holmes stood a moment gazing toward the east, where the lamps of Wapping glimmered faintly through the haze. "Watson," he said at last, "we stand upon the edge of a tale long buried. Tomorrow it may rise up and engulf us. Till then, we must prepare, not for the man only, but for the truth he fears. And that, my dear fellow, is a foe more relentless than any living adversary." With that, he hailed another cab, and we rattled back through the fog, the shadow of 50 years pressing upon us more heavily than the night itself. The hansom rattled us back toward Baker Street, but Holmes remained withdrawn, his gaze fixed beyond the blurred window, as though the fog itself spelled out some cipher only he could read. I had grown used to these silences, but that evening there was something in the set of his jaw which told me his mind was not merely occupied, but burdened. When at last we reached our rooms, and Mrs. Hudson had brought in the lamp and supper, he pushed the food aside untouched and began to pace, each stride measured as if it kept time with his thoughts. "Watson," he said suddenly, "you will have noted that Captain Brandt, though defiant, was not wholly master of himself. There was fear behind his words, fear not of the police, nor of exposure, but of something more personal. Such fear leaves traces as distinct as blood upon snow. Tomorrow's meeting at the Mercury may give us the tale, but until then we must examine what we already know." He flung himself into his chair, drew his knees up, and clasped his fingers beneath his chin. "Consider, a playbill of the Lady of Lyons dated October 21st, 1845. Upon its back the initials M.V. and the sign of a wheel upon an anchor. In the same envelope a signet ring of the St. Aubin crest, concealed for half a century within a Bible. A note warning that the paper is perilous. What conclusion suggests itself? That the playbill and ring were once in the possession of Mary Vale, I ventured, and that their concealment hints at some liaison with Sir Leonard St. Aubyn before he married the lady who became Lady Eleanora. Holmes' lips curved in the faintest smile. You progress admirably. Yes, Mary Vale was doubtless connected with Sir Leonard, and Brant was connected with her. His violent defence of her in the Strand Gallery, the gallery token itself, and his knowledge of the playbill all point that way. Yet why should he, or any man, guard the relic with such jealousy half a century later? There must have been some act, Watson, some crime or betrayal, of which that night at the theatre was the prelude. Our task is to fit the fragments together. Before I could reply, there came a knock, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade. His sharp features and bustling air were as familiar to us as the rattle of his boots upon our stair. He carried a small bundle of papers beneath his arm. "I thought you'd be mixed up in this, Mr. Holmes," said he briskly. "We had word from the Curzon Street household that you'd been called in." "Well, I've been put on the business myself, and I'll thank you not to step too far ahead of the yard. We've traced a fellow answering to your sailor's description. Scar upon the jaw, grey beard, left-handed, lurking about Seven Dials these past weeks. Calls himself Captain Brant. Does that fit with anything you found?" Holmes's eyes glinted. "It does indeed, Lestrade. We saw him tonight." Lestrade's eyebrows shot up. "Saw him? And let him slip? Upon my word, Mr. Holmes, I can't make you out. When I've a man under my nose, I clap the irons on him. That's my way." "And often an excellent way," Holmes replied smoothly, "when the crime is a simple one. But here, the theft of a playbill conceals a deeper matter. Arrest Brant tonight, and you may never learn why he struck down a butler and risked Curzon Street. Leave him free until tomorrow, and we may unearth a secret buried 50 years. Which course is the more profitable to justice?" Lestrade shifted, clearly torn between his instinct for immediate action and his unwilling respect for Holmes's reasoning. At length he grunted, "Very well, have it your way. But if he slips off downriver, I'll not answer for the Commissioner's temper." Holmes accepted the concession with a nod, then asked if Lestrade had further intelligence. The inspector laid the papers upon our table. "Not much. We searched Pike's shop after hearing rumours of suspicious trade. Found nothing save a bundle of playbills and a few naval odds and ends. But one paper caught my eye. A bill of sale for a trunk purchased from a lodging house in Kent, dated 2 weeks ago. The name given was C. Brant." Holmes leaned forward eagerly. "A trunk from Kent, you say? And sold recently? That, Watson, is of the highest importance. The family estate of the St. Albans lies in Kent. What if that trunk contained the Bible and its concealed treasures? The ring and the playbill were not discovered by accident, but by this very Brant, rifling through the effects of the dead. When he found the ring, he left it, but when the bill came to light, he seized it. The difference is telling." "But why leave the ring?" I asked. "Because the ring could be traced, the playbill not. And the playbill contains, what? Perhaps a message, perhaps an assignation, perhaps evidence of a marriage or promise that would overturn the Admiral's honour. We must be patient, Watson. Tomorrow may tell us more." Lestrade grunted again, less contentedly. "I'll have my men within call, Mr. Holmes. If this sailor means mischief, I'll not have you and the doctor facing him alone." "By all means, Lestrade," said Holmes cordially, "but station them at a distance. If the man scents the law, he will vanish like smoke. Better that he sees only Watson and myself. The truth is not drawn out with truncheons." The inspector, only half satisfied, took his leave, muttering of risks and responsibilities. When the door had closed behind him, Holmes resumed his pacing. "You perceive, Watson, how the pattern sharpens. Brant is no mere thief. He is a man chained to the past, compelled to guard its secrets though they burn his hands. His fear is not of prison, but of revelation. That is what makes this case so singular." We spoke little more that evening, for Holmes soon took up his violin and drew from it a low, restless melody that echoed my own unease. The next day passed with agonizing slowness.
Holmes busied himself with correspondence and chemical analysis of the dust from Curzon Street, but spoke little of his conclusions. As the appointed hour drew near, we made our way once more eastward, the fog rolling thick upon the river like a winding
sheet. The hulk of the Mercury loomed black against the dim lamps of Wapping, its timbers sagging with age, its deck deserted. A lantern swung faintly at the gangway. Holmes laid a hand upon my arm. "Courage, Watson. Tonight we may hear a confession long withheld, or else face a danger greater than we have yet imagined. Keep your eyes open and your revolver ready. The river hides many sins, and it does not always give them back." With that, we mounted the groaning planks and stepped into the silence of the abandoned ship, where the truth of 50 years waited in the shadows. The hulk of the Mercury received us with a groan of timbers and a hollow echo that reverberated down her deserted passages. The lantern swayed at the gangway like a will-o'-the-wisp, casting long fingers of light across the warped planks and leaving the corners to brood in darkness. Holmes advanced with the quick, noiseless step of a cat, his eyes darting to each coil of rope and shadow of mast as though he expected them to spring to life. I confess that I kept my revolver in hand, the atmosphere of that ancient wreck being more fitted to a nightmare than a tryst with truth. We gained the main deck, where the boards gaped and the rigging creaked mournfully overhead. A single figure stood by the hatchway, the lantern's glow catching the streak of iron grey in his beard. It was Captain Brant. He raised his hand in a curt gesture of greeting and beckoned us below. "You've come, then," he said, his voice roughened by the river damp. "Good. The Mercury has seen men die before. She can hold one more secret before she goes to the breakers." Holmes inclined his head. "We come to hear, Captain, not to condemn. Speak freely." Brant led us down into the cabin. The narrow place smelt of tar and mildew, and on the table stood a bottle of rum with 3 glasses, though only one had been poured. He seated himself heavily, his broad shoulders bent as though they bore a weight no human sinew could long support. For a long while he stared at the table, then at the shadows that wavered along the curved timbers of the hull. When at last he spoke, his words fell slowly, with the solemnity of a man lowering stones into deep water. "I was no captain then," he began, "only a common seaman off the Baltic run, with little more to my name than a strong back and a pair of fists. But I had a sweetheart, Mary Vale. She was governess to the St. Aubyn household, a slip of a thing, fair-haired, gentle, but with a spirit that would flare when trodden on. She loved Sir Leonard, though he was then but a young officer, and he swore he would marry her. Swore it to me by heaven when I stood between them and the father who cursed their match." His voice thickened. He poured the rum into his glass and drank it at a draught before continuing. "But fathers have long arms and money longer still. Lord St. Aubyn forbade it, and Sir Leonard—" "Aye," he bent. Mary was cast
aside. She clung to the promise that he would keep faith, but the man was weak. "The playbill you seek, Mr. Holmes, it was their token." She marked it with her hand, the letters of her name, and the crest of the ring he had given her in secret. That night, in the Strand Gallery, she waited for him, while I kept guard. But he never came. Instead came 2 of his kind, young sprigs, laughing, jeering. You've heard how I flung them down the stair. I'd have done worse had Mary not caught at my arm. She would not have scandal. She still believed he meant honourably. The sailor's hand trembled on the table, the veins standing out like cordage. But when she went to meet him after the play, she found a letter. No man, only a letter, cold words telling her it was over. She was nothing less than nothing. He was to wed a lady of title. She broke then, Mr. Holmes, broke like a mast in a gale. She gave me the bill, begged me to guard it, and vanished into the night. I searched every street, every lodging. Weeks later they told me she had been found drowned near Rotherhithe. Drowned, or driven. There was silence in the cabin, save for the creak of the timbers and the faint lap of water against the hull. My heart ached for the man, for there was no mistaking the raw truth in his voice. Holmes's tone, when it came, was low and even. And the ring? Taken from her before she left. I reckon Sir Leonard or his father reclaimed it to erase the trace, but she had marked the bill with it, and that was enough. I kept it hidden, carried it across oceans, till the years made me old and bitter. Then when I heard the Admiral was dead, and the Bible yielded up its treasure, I knew the past was stirring again. That bill must not see daylight. It would shame his name, drag mine through the courts, perhaps. I struck down the butler because he barred the way. I would not harm the old lady, but I had to have it. Holmes' eyes gleamed in the lantern light. Yet you did not destroy it. It lies here, among your hoard. Why guard what you so greatly feared? Brandt's chest heaved. Because it was hers, because every line of it is her hand, her hope, her heart. I could not burn it. I stole it to keep her from the world's sneers. But now, he broke off, pressing a hand to his brow. Now others sniff at my heels. A man cannot keep a secret against London's hunger for scandal. Perhaps it is time the truth were told. Holmes leaned forward, his voice a thread of steel. If you speak, Captain, speak wholly. Half-truths rot worse than lies. Was there a marriage, a child? At that, the sailor gave a shudder, and for the first time his defiance wavered. He opened the journal on the table and pushed it toward Holmes. Within, on the yellowed pages, lay entries written in a neat, feminine hand. The name Mary Vale appeared more than once, and alongside it, cryptic references. The bow at St.
Bride's, the ring restored, Leonard's oath. Read, said Brandt hoarsely. You are clever enough. You'll piece it out. She believed herself married. A ceremony, quiet, by a curate bought with St. Aubyn money. But it was no true bond, merely a trick to still her doubts till she could be discarded. That was the crime, Mr. Holmes. That was the betrayal. The shock of his words left me speechless. Holmes turned the pages with the delicacy of a surgeon handling tissue. His face was set, the mouth hard, but his eyes burned with a cold fire. You have confirmed what I suspected, he said at last. This is no longer a matter of theft, but of perjury and fraud, a crime of the gravest order. Sir Leonard built his career upon a lie, and his descendants inherit the stain. No wonder the relics were hidden. Brandt buried his face in his hands. I wanted only to guard her memory, but now you see what it is. Do with it as you will. For me, the tide is running out. The Mercury and I will sink together soon enough. Holmes rose, gathering the journal and playbill with swift precision. No, Captain, you will not sink, for the truth you guard must surface. Scotland Yard will have its thief, but history will have its reckoning. Whether Lady Eleanora bears it is another matter. For now, you will remain at hand. I shall arrange it with Inspector Lestrade. We left him thus, slumped by the lantern, while the old ship moaned about him. As we crossed back to the wharf, Holmes spoke in a low, taut tone. The mystery clears, Watson, but the peril grows. For if Brandt has kept faith with memory, there are others who keep faith with silence, and they will not hesitate at darker measures. We hold in our hands the key to a scandal that could shake the name of St. Aubyn, and there are those who would rather kill than see that key turned. The river lapped beneath us, indifferent, as though it had swallowed 100 such secrets, and would take 100 more before the night was done. The walk back from the river was a grim one. The fog clung to our clothes, and the smell of tar and decay seemed to follow us like a shadow. Holmes pressed on in silence, his long strides purposeful, the journal and playbill hidden beneath his coat. I ventured no questions, for I knew by the rigid set of his features that his mind was already racing ahead, fitting the confession we had just heard into the larger puzzle. Only when Baker Street lamps shone faint through the gloom did he speak, and then in that
which told me he was thinking aloud rather than addressing me. The fraud of a false marriage. Yes, Watson, it fits. It explains the note in the Bible, the concealment of the ring, the desperate theft of the playbill. But fraud alone does not account for murder, nor for the fear which still grips Brant. There is something more, something left unsaid. Once within the sitting room, he threw off his coat and
flung himself into the chair, the journal spread open on his knees. I poured us both brandy, which he accepted without looking up, his eyes scanning the faded ink. He read swiftly, turning pages, until he stopped at one passage and tapped it with his finger. "Here, Watson, listen. October 22nd, 1845, he swore the vow before God's altar. The curate mumbled the words. I felt the ring upon my hand, yet Leonard trembled, and I fear his courage wanes. Jabez says to trust, but I read doubt in Leonard's eyes." Holmes looked up sharply. "Do you not see? Mary believed herself married. Brant knew it. But the ceremony was a sham. The curate was bribed to mutter words without sacrament. A cruel trick. And yet, Watson, why should such a thing inspire such dread after half a century?" "Because," I said slowly, "if the marriage were thought real, there might have been an heir who could contest the St. Albans succession." Holmes' eyes flashed with approval. "Precisely, and an heir might exist still. That, my dear fellow, would be peril indeed. A line of admirals, estates, fortune, all toppled by the claim of a governess wronged 50 years past. If Brant or any other holds proof of such a child, then indeed the paper is perilous." At that instant there came a brisk knock at the door, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade. His manner was sharp with excitement, his thin face flushed from the night air. "Holmes, we've trouble," he said without preamble. "Your sailor's not to be found. We sent a man to keep watch by the Mercury, and when he looked in again an hour ago, the bird had flown. No Brant, no lantern, no journal either, if he carried a second. Vanished clean." Holmes's expression hardened. He did not vanish, he was removed. Brant had no stomach for flight. He was resigned to his fate. Someone else feared his tongue. "Did your man see aught?" "Only a skiff pulled off into the fog. Could have been any waterman." Holmes rose at once, the restless energy surging back into him. "And we must work quickly, Lestrade, before we lose not only the sailor but the truth he carried. We have the journal, thank heaven, but if others suspect its existence, our position is precarious. Watson and I heard enough to guess the motive. Have you yet examined the St. Albans lineage for gaps?" Lestrade shook his head. "We're not genealogists, Mr. Holmes. My concern is with theft and assault." Holmes smiled grimly. "Then allow me to play genealogist. Sir Leonard cast off Mary Vale in 1845, yet within a year he married a lady of title. But what if, before her death, Mary bore a child, that the secrecy, the theft, the silence all point to it? That child would now be of middle age. He, or she, would carry the blood of St. Albans. And perhaps there are those who know it." Lestrade muttered something about wild conjecture, but I could see that Holmes's reasoning impressed him despite himself. Holmes turned back to the journal and ran his finger along the margins. "Yes, here. December, the quickening. I dare not write more. And again in March. The weight grows heavy. Leonard does not come. I am alone, save for Jabez. Watson, this is proof enough. Mary was with child." The words chilled me. A secret heir, hidden for 50 years, perhaps living still. It was a thought fit to topple houses. Holmes closed the book with decision. "Lestrade, you must guard Lady Eleanora this very night. If those who struck Brant suspect she knows more, they may strike again. Place your men about Curzon Street, but discreetly. Meanwhile, Watson and I shall call on our friend Hargreaves at first light. If anyone knows whether whispers of a forgotten heir have circulated in legal circles, it will be the family solicitor. Lestrade grumbled but agreed, and within moments was gone, his boots clattering down the stair. Holmes stood at the window, staring into the misty glow of Baker Street, his face drawn and intent. "Watson," he said softly, "we are upon the threshold of revelation, but take care. Secrets of inheritance are the most dangerous of all. Gold may tempt men to theft, but blood tempts them to murder. I would not be surprised if we hear before dawn that another blow has fallen." He was prophetic. Even as the hour struck 4, a messenger came pounding at our door, a boy with a note smudged and hastily written. Holmes tore it open and read aloud. "From Curzon Street, housekeeper reports maid Annie Pike missing since midnight. Traces of struggle near servants' entrance. Police summoned." Holmes's jaw tightened. "It begins. The girl was the weakest link and someone has snapped it. Quick, Watson, dress yourself. There is not a moment to lose. The fate of the past and of the present may both hang upon this child of 7 dials." In 10 minutes we were again in a cab, rattling through the half-lit streets toward Mayfair, the fog rolling past, like the very spectres of the wrongs of 1845. Holmes sat rigid, every nerve alert, the journal clutched in his hand. I knew better than to speak. The hour of danger had come, and with it the promise that the buried sins of half a century would rise at last into the light. The cab deposited us at Curzon Street just as dawn was beginning to wash the rooftops in a wan grey light. The house stood unnaturally still, its windows black, the fog curling about the railings like smoke from an extinguished fire. A constable admitted us without delay, his face set with the weary gravity of one who has seen mischief but cannot yet name it. Inside, the servants clustered in hushed knots, their whispers falling silent as Holmes passed with that purposeful stride which brooks no delay. Lady Eleanora hadn't risen, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Reeve, met us at the threshold of the back passage with eyes wide from a sleepless vigil. "It is Annie, sir?" she whispered hoarsely.
She was last seen at 11:30 when she went out with scraps for the dustman. The door was found ajar this morning, and in the yard—" She faltered, her hand lifting to her lips. Holmes brushed past, his keen gaze already sweeping the flagged stones of the service yard. The constable led us to the spot. There, upon the cold paving, a wicker basket lay overturned, its contents spilled and trampled. A smear of ash-blackened mud marked the stones beside it, and near the drain grating a scrap of cloth fluttered damply in the morning breeze. Holmes stooped, lifted it with his forceps, and held it to the light. "Cheap calico, torn from an apron," he murmured. "The edge is scorched, Watson, singed by a gas jet, as with the hair we found in the writing room. Our adversary is consistent. Observe also the impression here, by the step. Heel iron, broken at the corner, and a second impression faintly ahead of it. The stride is long, the weight heavy. A man carried her." "Carried her where?" I asked anxiously. Holmes's eyes travelled to the paling fence beyond, where a panel had been prized loose. He slipped through the gap, and we followed into a narrow lane that ran between the garden walls. There the ground was soft with last night's drizzle, and plain upon it were the marks of boots dragging, stumbling. A deeper groove, irregular but parallel, told of a limp burden borne across the mud. Holmes bent, touched the soil, and raised his fingers to his nose. "Tar and river sand," he said curtly, "the same that clung to Cade's kitchen floor. The trail runs east. They have taken her toward the river." A low cry escaped Mrs. Reeve, who had followed at a distance. Holmes turned to her with unusual gentleness. "Courage, madam. The girl lives yet. There are no signs of a struggle unto death. She is carried, not slain. We must follow swiftly." We returned to the street, and within moments Holmes had summoned a cab. He directed the driver toward the docks, then leaned back,
his eyes half closed, but his mind plainly whirring like a dynamo. It is clear now, Watson. Brant was silenced, or spirited away, because he carried knowledge too dangerous. The girl is taken because she unwittingly bridged the past to the present. She is blood to the man who posted the notice in Pike's window, or tool to him. In either case, she is indispensable. Our quarry seeks to master the truth by force of possession, but they forget that the truth lies not with Annie nor with Brant, but here. He tapped the journal beneath his coat. We rattled through half-wakened streets until the smell of the river struck us once more, and the outlines of cranes and spars loomed through the mist. Holmes dismissed the cab and led the way down a narrow flight of steps slick with slime. At the bottom lay a stretch of broken quay, littered with barrels and coils of rope. A waterman, gaunt and weather-beaten, was just shipping his oars into a
skiff. Holmes hailed him. "Have you seen aught of a girl brought this way within the hour? Fair-haired, slight, carried by two men, perhaps?" The fellow spat into the water. "Aye, sir. Saw two coves bundling a lass into a boat, muffled her face in a shawl, put off eastward toward Limehouse, paid me to keep my eyes shut." Holmes tossed him a sovereign. "Then open them wide henceforth. Watson, come." Another skiff was quickly procured, and within minutes we were upon the river, the fog parting in slow wreaths as the oars bit into the grey water. The tide ran sluggish, yet the air had that eerie stillness which carries sound curiously. Twice we fancied we heard the dip of other oars ahead, though the mist concealed all. Holmes, his gaze fixed, guided our waterman like a pointer hound upon scent. At length, a dark shape loomed, a warehouse by the water's edge, its roof sagging, its windows black. A faint gleam of light leaked from a chink in the shuttered upper floor. Holmes touched my arm. "There, they have taken her in. This is their lair. Note the barge moored below. The means of escape should we press too close. We must move with caution." We landed noiselessly upon the slippery stones and crept up to a side door. It was locked, but Holmes produced from his pocket a slender tool, and within seconds the bolt yielded. The interior smelt of dust and damp hemp. We mounted a narrow stair, every creak seeming to shout alarm, until we came to a half-open door through which streamed the glow of a lantern. Voices reached us, harsh, urgent. One was that of a man, guttural with a rasping foreign accent. The other, fainter, was Annie's, muffled with fear. "She must be kept until we have the rest," the man was saying. "The lawyer will talk when he knows the girl is in our hands. With her, we can bargain. Without her, we are lost." Holmes's eyes flashed. He pressed a finger to his lips, then motioned me to ready my revolver. With a sudden thrust, he flung the door wide, and we burst in. The scene that met our eyes was stark. Annie Pike, pale but unhurt, sat bound to a chair, her fair hair tumbled about her face. Beside her stood a thick-set man with a seaman's gait, his left hand clutching a cosh, his right shading the lantern. At the sight of us, he gave a snarl and lunged, but Holmes was upon him in an instant, striking the cosh from his grasp and hurling him against the wall with a strength born of sheer determination. "Hold fast, Watson!" Holmes cried. I covered the fellow with my pistol while Holmes cut Annie's bonds. She clung to him with sobs of relief, but he gently set her aside. "Courage, child. You are safe now." The man glared at us with baleful eyes. "You meddle in what is not yours, Englishman," he spat. "The past should stay buried." Holmes's voice was icy. "And yet you dig it up with violence and lies. Who are you? What claim have you to this matter?" The fellow set his jaw, but Holmes had already stooped to retrieve from the man's coat a folded paper. He opened it, and I glimpsed the seal, a crest not unlike the St. Aubin wheel and anchor, but altered, coarser. Holmes studied it with grim satisfaction. "The game runs deeper than we thought, Watson. This man is no chance hireling. He is blood to the St. Aubins, or at least claims to be, and he would hold the family fortune by force of a girl's life. But we have turned his hand against him." The warehouse creaked about us, the lantern light casting grotesque shadows on the bare beams. I felt that the very river outside pressed against the walls to hear the confession that trembled upon the edge of revelation. Annie, trembling but resolute, raised her head. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, "he said I was to be used because of who I am, because I am more than I thought. He said the blood of St. Aubyn runs in me." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Holmes's face darkened, and he closed the paper with a snap. "Watson," he said grimly, "the past has indeed walked into the present. The child of Mary Vale may not have perished after all. We must learn tonight whether Annie Pike is merely bait or the living heir of a crime half a century old." The man's boast hung between us like the reek of the river. Annie, white and shaking, turned her face to Holmes as if to read there the measure of her fate. He steadied her with a light touch at the shoulder and, without removing his gaze from our prisoner, spoke with a calm that cut like a knife. "Your name," said Holmes. The fellow's lips curled. "Brand," he growled. "Carl Brand, C. Brand to those with sense enough to mind their own business." "The same who posted for naval relics in Anchor Lane," Holmes returned softly, "and the same left-handed brute who coshed a faithful servant at Curzon Street, ferried a seaman from the Mercury, and fancied he could barter a girl against papers that will not burn. Sit still, Mr. Brand. Your feet betray you." The man's left boot twitched involuntarily, the broken heel iron rasping the plank with a music I had already heard in the yard at Curzon Street. He spat, but said nothing. Holmes flicked open the folded paper he had taken from Brand's coat and held it where the lantern showed the broken impression of a seal, a wheel upon an anchor, crudely pressed. "A forgery," Holmes observed. "Molten grease, not wax, and a cheap stamp bought near Tower Hill, yet aping the St. Aubyn crest. You meant to bully a solicitor with cast metal heraldry and a kidnapped niece. What says the letter, Watson?" I read, while keeping my pistol level. "To Mr. Hargreaves, send the paper found with the ring by 10 of the clock this day to the Anchor Warehouse Mill Stairs. No police. The girl goes free for the paper. Delay, and she goes overboard. C. Brand." Holmes slipped the note away. "You overreached yourself, Mr. "Brand, you threatened a man who keeps counsel, but consults Mr. Holmes." A floorboard creaked behind us. Holmes whirled and thrust Annie to the floor with a swiftness that startled a cry from her lips. A pistol barked from the shadow of the stair and splintered the doorpost over my head. I fired back by instinct. A shape lurched and fled. The thud of boots clattered down to the waterside. "After him!" shouted Holmes. "I've the big one," I answered, jerking my chin at Brand, who had half risen. He subsided at the cold circle of my barrel. Holmes was across the room and out upon the stair in 3 strides. I heard his feet take the treads in that soundless fashion of his, then the scuffle and a splash from below. Annie, brave child that she proved, had already mastered her sobs and knelt to gather the cords from the floor, twisting them with quick, capable fingers. "Here, doctor," she whispered, offering me a length. "Tie him fast. Mr. Holmes mustn't come back to danger." I trust the man with a thoroughness learned in the army. He cursed softly in a tongue I could not place, and then fell to a sullen silence. Moments later, Holmes reappeared, wet to the shin, his hair ruffled by the raw breath of the river. "He is gone," said he shortly. A second skiff lay ready. The fellow knew his exits. "Mr. Brand will serve our purpose, however. Come, Watson, cut the girl loose and down with all 3 of us to the waterside. Lestrade should be closing his net by now, if he has any zeal left after the night's alarms." Between us, we got Annie to her feet. Her courage did her credit. Save for a tremor at the lips, she held her head up and moved at once. "I am not what he said, sir," she managed as we went. "Or if I am, I did not know it. Uncle Jabez, Mr. Pike, always told me I was nothing but Annie Pike, as good as honest work can make one." Holmes answered with that peculiar gentleness which I have sometimes seen in him toward the very young. "Honesty is an ancestry of its own, child. Blood is an accident. At the key,
The fog had thinned into long, shivering veils. A whistle sounded to our right. A shadow detached itself from a pile of barrels. In another breath, Lestrade stood before us, with 2 constables at his heels. "So," he panted, "we followed your cab, and then your waterman's tail. What have you there?" "See Brand in the flesh," Holmes replied. "Accessory to assault, abduction and, if I am not mistaken, conspiracy to extort. Take him, Lestrade, and keep him where the fog cannot find him. He had a confederate who shot from the stair and escaped by skiff. Post men along Mill Stairs to Rotherhithe. He will try for foreign water when the tide turns." They clapped irons upon Brand without ceremony. He went quietly then, with a look that promised reckoning at another hour. Holmes turned to Annie. "You will ride with us to Baker Street," he said. "Mrs. Hudson will find you."
T, and I must ask you 2 questions there that will not do for the street. She glanced about her, bewildered and spent, but nodded. Within an hour, the girl sat by our fire with a blanket round her shoulders and a steaming cup between her hands, her eyes following Holmes as if the very walls would be safer for his pacing. When the colour had returned a little to her cheeks, he set a small tray on the table and drew the St. Aubyn's signet from its wrappings. The old resinous odour rose again upon the air. "Annie," said he, and his tone had the grave courtesy of a judge, "have you ever seen this mark? Not the ring itself, this stamp of ship's wheel and anchor, anywhere in your family keepsakes?" Her gaze faltered, then settled. From the front of her plain dress, she drew a little heart-shaped locket of poor gilt, patinated by years and the warmth of a breast. She opened it with nervous fingers. I leaned closer. Within, beneath a curl of very pale hair, lay a wafer of darkened wax, cracked across. But the impression upon it, though faint, was unmistakable. A wheel, surmounting an anchor. "My mother left it me when she died," Annie whispered. "She said only that it was a sign of trust and that I must keep it hidden. Uncle Jabez would not have me wear it at all. I put it on when I came to service because I thought none would notice." Holmes's eye kindled. He took the ring, warmed the inner groove by the lamp, and brought the locket's wax close. "The cut is shallow," he murmured, "but the line of the rim corresponds. Watson, you recall the scent about the ring, the resin of old seals. This wax and that ring have found each other before." Annie's hands shook. "Then it is true. I do not know whether to be glad or afraid." "Both are natural," said Holmes. "One more question. Did your mother ever speak the name of her mother?" "She called her Mary when she prayed, sir," the girl said simply, a tear escaping and shining upon the gilt. "And once she said Mary Vale very soft, as if it were holy." Holmes shut his eyes for an instant, as a man might before pronouncing a benediction or a sentence. When he opened them, there was no triumph in them, only a hard clarity. "We shall not speak this outside these walls until necessity compels. But I will not deceive you, child. That name and this seal tie you by blood to the house that employed you. Whether the law will acknowledge what honour denied is another matter. There is, however, one man who must be told at once, and another who must be forestalled." "The solicitor," I said. "Hargreaves, and C. Brand's ally," Holmes returned. "Note that the letter named 10 o'clock for the exchange. Brand expected to receive the playbill today. He will not. We have it. He will therefore try for the next best leverage, panic, in Lincoln's Inn. Lestrade can sit on the fellow himself. We shall go to Hargreaves and place the journal under his eye. The law likes its proofs in order, and we must give it what order we can in so tangled a skein." We were not long in reaching the sombre fronts and clipped planes of Lincoln's Inn. Hargreaves admitted us to his private room with a face in which anxiety and a certain decency wrestled for mastery. When Holmes set the journal and the rescued note upon his desk, the struggle ended. He read, turned to the last entries, and at length took off his spectacles with a hand that trembled. "This is ruin," he said quietly. "Ruin or justice."
Sometimes they are the same word, Holmes answered. Listen to me, Mr. Hargreaves. Before you weigh either, you will receive, if you have not already, a communication demanding that you surrender a paper in exchange for a kidnapped servant. You will do nothing of the kind. The girl is safe. The paper is here. He touched the journal. You will instead send a reply inviting the caller to attend upon you at 11, when I and Inspector Lestrade will be present. You will also require that he come alone and unarmed to hear terms much to his advantage. You see the trap, Hargreaves. The solicitor's iron-grey whiskers quivered. You intend to lay hands upon the Confederate? I intend, said Holmes, and now the steel was plain in his voice, to force the man behind C. Brand into speech. We have witnessed the ruthlessness of his tools. We shall presently gauge the courage of his nerve. He has hidden half a century in other men's silence. Let us see how he fares when alone with the truth at noon. And Lady Eleanora? I ventured. Holmes's gaze softened. She must be spared the shock until we have sifted the dross from the ore. If there is grace in justice, we shall find it for her. Hargreaves squared his shoulders as if before a bench. Very well, Mr. Holmes. 11 o'clock it shall be. I will play my part. Do so, Holmes said. He turned toward the door, and to me he added low, Keep Annie where no whisper can reach her, Watson. At 11 we bait our hook with law. By noon we may land a fish that has swum safely in dark waters since 1845. At 11 o'clock precisely, we sat with Hargreaves in his sober chamber, where the softened light through bottle-glass panes made a pallid pool upon the green baize. Lestrade had taken a chair by the door, with an affectation of ease that deceived nobody. Two men of his stood without upon the stair. The journal lay closed beside Hargreaves's blotter. In my pocket was the rescued note, and in Holmes's hand, like an instrument about to be tuned, the faded playbill which Wilkes had given us from his drawer of relics. He held it by the corners, and once or twice I saw him let the edges meet and part again as a man tests the spring of a blade. A clerk's step sounded along the passage. The handle turned, and there entered, not a rough customer from Anchor Lane, but a man of
55 in sober black, dressed with that exactness which speaks of self-respect and committee rooms. His hair was carefully brushed, his nose thin and slightly arched, the lips set with an habitual self-command. He bowed to Hargreaves and inclined his head to the rest of us with a cool civility. "Mr. Pottle," said Hargreaves, rising. "Your note was urgent," returned the newcomer in a low, agreeable voice. "You propose terms, sir. I am here to hear them, as agent for parties who desire to avoid scandal and to purchase certain papers which have unfortunately strayed from their proper custody." Holmes did not trouble to hide the flicker of satisfaction that crossed his face. "You come alone, Mr. Pottle?" "As requested." "And unarmed?" Pottle's faint smile deepened. "I am a solicitor, Mr. Holmes, not a bravo." "Excellent. Then let us be lawyers for 5 minutes." Holmes motioned him to the chair opposite. "You act, you say, for parties. Shall we spare titles? We speak of the St. Aubyn interest." "The St. Aubyn dignity," corrected Pottle gently. "The word is not indifferent. Dignity may be preserved, where interest, even just interest, may be destroyed by indiscretion. If papers exist, scraps, tokens, fantasies, which might be employed by mischief-makers to sully a name honoured in the service of the Queen, my clients would purchase them at a just price." Lestrade shifted with a snort, but Holmes lifted a finger, and he subsided. "Price," said Holmes, "is a coarse measure for certain wares. Let us measure in proof. What do you offer in proof that your purse and your principal are legitimate?" Pottle's calm did not stir. He drew from his pocket a folded parchment and placed it upon the table. "A retaining letter from Sir Alistair St. Aubyn, Baronet, head of the family since the Admiral's decease, empowering me to treat for the recovery of any documents purporting to effect succession. I add, for your private assurance, that I have served the St. Aubyns for 20 years. Mr. Hargreaves knows my hand." Hargreaves inclined his head stiffly. "I know it. And now,"
continued Pottle, turning those cool eyes upon Holmes. The price. Holmes did not glance at the parchment. He set the playbill flat upon the baize, smoothed it once more, and with his nail traced the penciled scrawl upon its back, G17, and below it the little device of wheel and anchor with the faint letters M.V. Price, he echoed, is commonly paid for what one does not already possess. Your side, I think, is already richer than it knows. Tell me, Mr. Pottle, why was a bill of the Lady of Lyons stolen from Curzon Street while rings and plates slept untouched? And why have you and yours been so desperately intent to regain it? The solicitor's gaze dropped to the paper and rose again without a ripple. Because it was taken from us by a thief, he said, and a
Gentleman does not bandy reasons with thieves. Holmes's lids lowered. Then permit me to bandy reasons with a gentleman's agent. This bill carries, in pencil, the initials of Mary Vale and a crest. It carries, too, something you have not observed. With that, he lifted the sheet to the light, and, taking from Hargreaves's stand a fresh sheet of foolscap, slid it beneath the playbill so that the white shone through the thin, time-worn rows. Look across the margin, here and here. Do you not see the two tiny punctures? They are pinholes, older than the penciling, older than the fold, made, I think, on the very night of October 21st, 1845, when a trembling girl pinned this keepsake within her bodice. Pottle's hands remained composed upon his knee, but a small pulse leapt at his temple. Holmes set the bill down, placed beside it the St. Aubyn's signet, and then, taking a spill, warmed the inner groove until the old resinous breath rose upon the air. Those same pinholes correspond, he went on in that quiet, inexorable tone, to two figures lightly indented in the paper, so lightly that only warmth will fetch them up. Your thief, your man Brand, did not think of that. Observe. He passed the warmed ring slowly over the margin. It was, to my medical eye, the old trick of a reagent and a latent stain. The heat coaxed a ghost of impressed graphite to bloom. Two numerals lifted from invisibility like a message from the dead. 47. 47, I breathed. Not a number at random, said Holmes, but a folio in St. Bride's parish register. Mary Vale had small cunning, but the woman who comforted her, perhaps a sister in service, had more. The curate, brought to Mumble, kept no lawful entry, but those who meant to force him to it later, if bravery returned, marked the folio they had been promised. The playbill was the ticket to the vestry. For the first time, Pottle moved. It was infinitesimal, a tightening at the corners of the mouth, a glance, no, the memory of a glance, toward the window, as if some old calculation of time and distance murmured in him. Holmes's voice scarcely altered. This is the secret you fear, not the bill, not the ring, not even the journal, which speaks of vows, but proves them only by a woman's faith, but the binding of all three to a place where the ink of the law may yet accuse. You sent C. Brand to fetch the paper. You had already primed him with forged seals to browbeat a timid attorney. When the sailor Brand began to speak, you plucked him from the mercury and hid him, or worse. When a maid's locket showed the same crest in wax, you stole the child to bargain with men who would not be bargained. You are no street bravo, Mr. Pottle. You are the modern engine that drives them. The room held its breath. Pottle's voice, when it came, was colder than before. You make picturesque charges, Mr. Holmes. You would place me in the dock upon the strength of a grease stain and a woman's diary. I would place you, said Holmes, first in a cab to St. Bride's, and then, depending on what we find, where Lestrade may oblige you. You speak of dignity. I propose it. If folio 47 bears no hand of Mary Vale or Leonard St. Aubyn, you shall walk from that church a free man, and I shall put the playbill and ring into your hand and bid you burn them. If it bears the curate's crabbed note recording a ceremony, clandestine or sham but attested,
And if, in the vestry drawer, there lies the half of a seal whose other half hangs at a poor girl's throat, then you will sit where the law can consider whether a false registration, later erased, was made at a gentleman's behest. Lestrade's chair creaked. "I can take him now," he muttered. "Not yet," said Holmes, without looking round. "We will not go to law with shadows if we can have daylight. Mr. Pottle." The solicitor's eyes measured him a long moment. "You have a taste for theatre, Mr. Holmes," he said softly. "Very well, I shall indulge it. To St. Bride's. But understand, should you find nothing, you will restore every scrap and cease to pry into the private griefs of a family which has given its sons to England." Holmes bowed. "You have my word." Hargreaves rose like a man beneath a sentence. "I will accompany you," he said. "Whatever is found, the law of it will be mine to bear to my client." We went out together, the four of us, with Lestrade's men shadowing, by way of Chancery Lane into Fleet Street, and so to the narrow way that drops to St. Bride's. The churchyard lay in a still noon, the famous wedding-cake spire rising pale against a sifting sky. Within, a verger of the old stamp, with keys enough to rattle like minor thunder, received our request with a disapproval that lessened only when Hargreaves named himself and the matter as one of grave family import. Down a short stair, he conducted us into that peculiar odorous piece of vestry and record-room, the smell of vellum and dust and the very breath of time. Holmes had no need to ask twice. The registers of the 40s were brought, great calf-bound volumes that looked as if they had weight for truth and not merely paper. He turned them with reverent exactness, counting in a low voice. The playbill opened beside him like a chart. 45, 46, folio 47. He paused. His finger lay along an entry scored through with a thin brown line, as if a hand had run a pen back across it long years before. The ink of the words had faded, yet there they were. Leonard St. Aubyn, Mary Vale, October 22nd. Curate Silas Hart. A sound came from Hargreaves that was scarcely human. Pottle's breath drew in upon his teeth. Holmes did not look up. He traced the cross-line, lifted the page to the light, and showed how the cancellation had been made, not upon the hour but weeks later, with another ink. And then, at last, he turned to the bottom drawer of the vestry press and spoke one word to the verger. "Seals." The old man, muttering of gentlemen's fancies, produced a small tin in which lumpy, time-stiffened wafers lay jostled together like shriveled fruit. Holmes sifted them with a surgeon's delicacy. When his hand stopped, I saw my friend's composed mouth grow, for a heartbeat, very hard indeed. Between his finger and thumb lay a broken half of wax in which even I could make out the upper arc of a wheel and the suggestion of an anchor's crown. He set it gently against the cracked wafer in Annie's locket. The brake line kissed the brake line. The halves made a hole. No one spoke. Lestrade coughed, and then thought better of it. Hargreaves put out a hand and steadied himself upon the bench. Holmes closed the tin, shut the register with a soft thud, and faced Pottle. "You will not buy this," he said. "You will answer for it. Whether the marriage was lawful in form, whether the curate was coerced, whether the later cancellation was honest or felonious, these are matters for a court, but the pretence that there was no ceremony will not serve you another day." Pottle's careful composure cracked then, not greatly, but enough for truth to peer through. "You think to unseat a baronetcy with a crumb of wax and a clerk's scrawl," he whispered. "You will tear down a house over a governess's tears." "It is not I who tear," said Holmes very gravely. "It was torn 50 years ago." Lestrade stepped forward at last. "Mr. Pottle, you will come with me." The solicitor drew himself up. "I go nowhere without counsel." "You shall have him," said Hargreaves, with a sternness I had not heard in him, "and you shall have me, for I will not see a lady ambushed by her own advisers." We came up into the thin daylight again. In the porch, Holmes touched my sleeve. "There is one task more, Watson, before we go to Curzon Street," he murmured. "Brant,
If he breathes, he must be fetched from whatever hole they have thrust him. His tongue shall yet be heard, if only to tell the place where Mary Vale lies. The living and the dead both have claims today. I looked back once into the cool dimness where the registers slept again, and I confess that a sense of awe took me. The awe one feels when the past, long dumb, speaks at last in the voice of ink and wax. The disclosure at St. Bride's struck like a bell that would not cease ringing. By the time we returned to Curzon Street, the household was in a state of tremor. Lestrade, with his men, had secured Brand and dispatched search parties for his accomplice. Annie Pike, though pale and shaken, bore herself with a quiet dignity that spoke more of lineage than any crest of wheel and anchor could do. Lady Eleanora received us in her withdrawing room, and Hargreaves, grave as a judge, stood by her side, the journal in his hand. Holmes bowed with
that mixture of courtesy and detachment which was peculiarly his. "My lady, I fear you must prepare yourself for truths long concealed. It is better they come from me than from tongues less delicate." He set upon the table the playbill, the signet ring, and the sealed wafer. With calm precision he told the tale, how Leonard St. Aubyn had entered into a clandestine union with Mary Vale, how it was recorded and then erased, how her despair had ended in tragedy, and how her child had survived, hidden among the poorest of London, until chance and villainy alike had forced her name into the light. Lady Eleanora listened without outcry, her face a mask of pallor, but her hand trembled upon the arm of her chair. When Holmes concluded, she turned her gaze upon Annie. "Child," she said, her voice low but clear, "you carry a name heavy with sorrow and honour alike. If what Mr. Holmes says is lawfully proved, then the blood of St. Aubyn flows in you. For myself, I shall not dispute it. Better truth, however bitter, than a lie long sweetened." At that Annie broke down, and I stepped to steady her. Holmes, however, maintained his reserve. "The law will speak in time," he said. "For now the girl is safe, the thieves unmasked, and the relics preserved. That is our immediate victory." Lestrade, for once subdued, gave a grudging nod. "We'll have Pottle in the dock before the month's end, and the Crown will sort the rest. You've done your part, Mr. Holmes, though you've near split a family tree down the middle." Holmes only smiled faintly. Better a tree split by the axe of truth than rotted hollow by deceit. That evening, back in Baker Street, I found Holmes seated by the fire, his violin idle at his side, the smoke of his pipe curling in meditative spirals. I ventured to ask if he felt satisfaction at so weighty a triumph. "My dear Watson," said he, "there are no triumphs in such matters. We do not create justice, we merely strip away the veils that men and time draw over it. The child of Mary Vale is found, yes, but what has she inherited? A name, perhaps a fortune, certainly a burden. For the St. Aubyns, the stain of fraud and cowardice. For Brant, the seaman, a life wasted in silence. For us, the knowledge that we did not flinch from the truth when it beckoned. That is all." He leaned back, and the firelight cast sharp lines upon his ascetic features. "Do not mistake me, Watson. There is satisfaction in unravelling a skein so knotted that it has baffled half a century. But in the end, the mind delights where the heart is heavy. You, with your physician's nature, feel the sorrow. I, with my trade, the logic. Both are true, both are necessary." I could find no answer, and for a long while we sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of the city. At last Holmes roused himself, drew the bow across the strings, and let a low, mournful air drift through the room. It was neither victory nor lament, but something between the voice of London itself, carrying the weight of forgotten loves and wrongs long buried, rising again for a moment before sinking once more into the great tide of memory.
Thus ended the affair of the clue hidden for 50 years,